Hi, I'm Sherry Hobb, author of The Art of Metal Clay. Welcome to the Art of Metal Clay special bonus DVD, where I'll be presenting many of the techniques shown in the book, along with 4 all-new projects. A heart bead with a colorful center stone, a silver and gold flower ring, a square bezel frame charm, Hi, I'm Sherry Hobb, author of The Art of Metal Clay. Welcome to the Art of Metal Clay special bonus DVD, where I'll be presenting many of the techniques shown in the book, along with 4 all-new projects. A heart bead with a colorful center stone, a silver and gold flower ring, a square bezel frame charm, and a bracelet made from a set of charms filled with polymer clay. So join me for an inspiring, informative, fun-filled journey through the world of metal clay. This project uses cork clay, which allows you to make a hollow form out of metal clay. And these heart-shaped necklaces, they're hollow inside, and they have been made with cork clay forms that have been hand-formed. And I'm going to show you how to make the core, and then how to build the bead around the core. To start, there's a product called cork clay, and it's just what it is. It's cork that's made into a clay. And it dries out, so I keep mine wrapped up tightly in plastic wrap. So think of it similarly to metal clay, that you have to treat it with respect and keep it moist and damp. And you just shape it into any shape that you want. It models just like modeling clay. And in this case, I'm going to make heart shapes. So I'll roll it into a ball to start out. And if it dries out at all, you just dip in and add a little water to it to keep it nice and moist. And you roll it into a ball. And the best way to make a heart shape is to roll it into a ball and then shape it into sort of a triangle shape. And then I just take my finger and make an indentation up at the top and start to shape these 2 rounded areas of the heart here and make a rounded point at the bottom. And the exciting thing is you can make any shape you want, and that's how you make a heart. And then this is just left to dry before it's ready to fire. The thing about cork clay is you want it to be thoroughly dry, even to the point of letting this dry 3 to 4 days until all the moisture's out of it. Otherwise, the moisture will release as it's being fired, and it tends to make more cracks or sort of burst the seams of your metal clay as the steam escapes and expands. So you just let that piece dry like that. And if you want to even refine that any further, you can sand cork clay to sand the edges down or whatever you want to do with it. I don't care as much because this is the inside of the bead, and if it's a little rough, I'm not worried about that. To make the metal clay stick to the cork clay, I use Sobo glue, and here's a few pieces that I have that are dry, and you just put a little glue on the bead, and I just use my finger or a paintbrush to apply an even surface, and that's just going to give me something that will help the metal clay stick to that as I'm building my heart bead, and let that dry thoroughly. You can make a bunch of shapes at one time if you want. It's a lot of fun. Now I'm ready to roll out my sheets to create my heart bead. I'm going to use 2 playing cards for a thin gauge of clay to cover this bead. The other nice thing about making a hollow bead is then you're not using as much of your clay and your bead won't be as heavy. Probably the best type of clay would be PMC Plus or PMC3 for the bead, because the PMC standard tends to shrink a lot and it's going to have to thin out and it may crack around your form. Get that a little damp there. Roll out your clay 2 cards thick. Clay's a little wet there. Wants to stick. Use a little badger balm or olive oil on your tools and on your fingers to keep that from sticking. And then to wrap your cork form, I've got one that's dry right here and it's got the glue on it. I'm going to pick this up and sort of wrap it halfway around my cork form. And I'm wrapping it very loosely. You don't want to wrap it so tight because as this dries, it's going to shrink a little bit. And I'll take my X-Acto knife and cut around the side of it. So I'm just covering half side of the bead right now. Cut some of that away. I've got a lot of clay I'm working with here. Keep it loose. You don't want it too tightly wrapped around. I'm going to use this excess for the other side. And I'm just going to let that set aside and dry for a minute. And see, I've just covered one side, and you can just let that sit. And now I'm going to roll out for the other side. These plain cards are great because they allow you to roll such even sheets, which is really important when you're making a bead because you don't want to have too many thin spots where you're going to have cracks and holes in your bead or a weak area that you don't notice after you've fired it. Another thing that's really handy to use are baby wipes to get the excess clay off of your fingers and to keep your fingers moist while you're working. And then I'm using a little badger balm to oil my fingers to keep them from sticking to the clay. Now here's the way to make this fit so it fits pretty well around the bead. Is I take my clay like this and I'm going to fold it up until it meets the other edge of the other sheet of clay that's already on, and it makes a mark. And then you pull it off and you have a nice line where it was touching the other edge. Let's cut that out with my knife. Err on doing it a little larger than you think you need it. And then to attach the two, you simply place this over on this side, and I'm using water. Actually, this is kind of dried out a little, so I'm going to put water all along that other seam. Put the clay on. And this tool works wonderfully. This is called a rubber shaper tool or a wipeout tool, and you can just blend the seam with this tool and go all the way around the seam, using your finger, using more water if needed. And if you have a little hole that needs filled later, it's no problem. You just use a little water and some soft clay and you can blend it. And you just keep smoothing it around the edges. It's hard to believe that something so messy could turn out to be a beautiful bead when you're done, but that's the beauty of this clay, is you can keep refining it. After you've refined your edges and you've smoothed out your shape over your cork form, let this sit up until the clay is just a little bit less damp and sticky. You can kind of tell by touching the surface, and you can see that the gloss of the water content's gone off the top of the clay there. And I'm going to texture the surface now. And I'm using a leather stamping tool, or you could use a piece of lace or whatever you want to do, and just texture your surface. And I'm just making a random pattern on here, and you can go around the edges. Actually, it helps to go around the edges because then you're sort of securing your seam. Texture that every which way. And then I'm going to add a little stone element there. But before I do that, let me get some holes started. Now, the reason you need to have holes is obviously for hanging it, and then also to help vent the cork as it burns away so that it can vent out while it's being fired so you don't burst a seam into your bead. I put a little guide hole in the top and then one in the bottom, because after this is fired I want to run a wire through the whole bead and put a dangle on the end. And don't worry about your holes being refined at this point. I can fix that right before I'm ready to put it in the kiln. Pinch off a little ball of clay and roll it into a ball. Now my clay's still fairly wet, so I can just add a little water with my finger and push this ball of clay right in the center. Kind of cracking a little bit, there we go. I use this little rubber shaper tool to refine the edges. Got a little crack going there. Smooth it out. Okay, and then I'll use my leather tool again and make a nice design in the center. And now to set a stone, these are cubic zirconia, and they are probably one of the best stones that you can use in metal clay because they can fire all the way to the temperature of 1650 degrees Fahrenheit. However, with court clay, you only want to fire that at 1470 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's true with any project you do with court clay. And to set the stone, go ahead and start to make a hole with your tool so the stone has somewhere to go. And you can just plop that down in the center. And I'm just pushing it with my fingernail. Now the trick to setting stones is you want to get the edge of the stone just under the surface of the clay, because remember your clay will be shrinking and you don't want it to shrink under the stone and your stone to pop out. So use a tool of some kind and gently keep pushing on your stone and get it a millimeter or so below the surface of the clay so that as it shrinks up and around, it holds that stone into place. And I just want to make sure it's nice and level. And you can use a pencil eraser or the flat side of your tool if you want to make sure it's nice and level on top. And I'm just going to let that dry. Sometimes as your clay starts to dry around your cork form, you'll notice that you get little cracks as it dries because it does shrink slightly. I've got one without a pattern on it that I want to show you so you can see these cracks clearly, and I want to repair those before I fire this. So I'm wetting it with some water, and you let that sit a few minutes so it can sort of rehydrate. And then to make sure those cracks don't come back after I fire it, I'm using some syringe clay, or you can use some homemade slip or paste that you just mix a little water in with your clay and put some of the syringe clay right over the crack. Use your paintbrush or your rubber shaped tool here, rubber tip tool. Need a little water on that. And just shove this clay right over the crack. Got it a little wet. I think my finger will work the best here. Some over this one too. And then go around your bead and find any areas that need filling or repaired. And by the way, you can use this same technique on a fired bead, so don't feel distressed, because a lot of times, even though you try as hard as you can to get the outer layer loosely wrapped, it does crack in a few places sometimes after firing. And you can go ahead and add wet clay onto the fired and refire it again and repair your piece if you need to. So that's how you repair the cracks in that. I wait a long time to make sure that the moisture hasn't been reintroduced into the cork clay before firing that, so maybe a day or so before you are ready to fire that. Remember to fire any hollow object or bead in a little cradle of fiber blanket, and this is sometimes known as doll prop, and it's available at ceramic stores. This will help to support and cradle the bead as it fires and keep it supported from rolling off or getting misshapen while it's being fired. So that's what you want to do before you fire your heart bead. And I have one that's been fired here, and it has a gold stone in the middle and the same pattern on it. And this piece looks white and it comes out of the kiln like that. And we're ready to burnish it. And to burnish it, because it has a texture, I use my brass brush and I just go over the surface. And this is flattening the silver particles. Nothing's coming off. There's nothing that's a powder surface. That's just simply how the silver looks when it comes out of the kiln. And you just brush over it and you can see the silver start to appear over the surface, and you just keep brushing that whole piece until it's a high shine silver that you like. You can continue to burnish it until it's as bright and sparkly as you want. And then if you have a tumbler and you want to run it through with stainless steel shot and some burnishing compound, that works great too, and you will have a highly polished bead that's ready to go on your project. Now after I've brushed this piece, I want to burnish it a little bit, and so I use this burnishing tool and just rub it across the highlights, and it'll give you a nice sparkle to your silver, to any highlights that you have. And this really works nice for textures. And if you don't have a burnishing tool, you can use a knitting needle, or you can use anything that's harder than the silver. Silverware, the back of a spoon works well. I'm going to go ahead and just burnish to get a little bit more of a contrast in your metal. And then the next step is we're going to patina this so that I can darken the recessed areas. And I'm using liver of sulfur, and it comes in little chips like this, or it comes in liquid solution. And I always keep mine stored in a dark film canister to keep the light away from it, because light ruins liver of sulfur. And you drop it into hot water, and you want to stir it around a little bit until the water's a pale yellow color. And make sure that you either wear gloves or don't touch the solution. You don't want this on your hands. You want to work in a well-ventilated area and make care not to have children or pets near the area you're working. And I've strung my bead on a stainless steel wire so that I can dip it into the liver of sulfur solution. So I'm just dipping it in. And the liver of sulfur will move through a few stages of coloration, starting with gold, moving to blues and purples, and then finally to a dark gray. And if you can see that, you've got this beautiful gold color. And you could actually leave your bead like that if you wanted, or you can keep it going, and it'll darken a little bit more. This gives your beads a rich antique look that might be really nice with those textures. You'll see how it's changing. There's more of a blue and a copper color there. And it doesn't matter if the water gets inside the bead. It's metal, it's pure silver, and so you're just fine. You'll want to rinse this out in clean water after you're done. And you keep moving until it's a gray-blue color, or whatever color you want to stop at. You can go to a black if you left it long enough. And I'm just using clean water. And put a little baking soda in your water, and that will help you to neutralize the liver of sulfur to keep it from continuing to patina the piece. Now, if you don't want to patina your piece, it will patina over time naturally, especially if you're wearing it a lot and it's rolling around your jewelry chest with other metals. They will pick up a beautiful patina just from being in the air. After that's rinsed off, I'm ready to polish it. And so dry that off a little. And then this is a buffing pad that is used to remove and polish silver, remove the black from the silver, and run this over the surface of the silver to remove all of the dark areas. And you'll notice that you see the silver start to shine through on the highlights, and it leaves the dark patina in the recessed areas. And keep working this buffing pad. These buffing pads are available at jewelry suppliers, and they're meant to polish silver and jewelry. And they do a great job. And you'll notice that the areas that I've used my burnishing tool really stand out with the high sparkle of the silver, whereas the areas that I simply use the brush on have more of a matte finish and a brushed effect. And then you keep finishing that to as much removed as you want, or you can leave it a little darker if you'd like. And then you've got a finished bead that's ready to string. And to finish this, you simply add a sterling silver wire through the center of the bead, add a loop and a little bead dangle and a chain, and you've got a finished antique looking heart bead. These simple floral rings are made with gold and silver, and they're using simple cake decorator cookie cutters to make the floral shapes. I'm going to start by making the center of my flower ring with 2-part putty silicone rubber to make a mold. And so it comes with 2 components in 2 different colors, and you simply just mix them together. And while I'm mixing that, I've looked for different objects like buttons and beads like this to figure out what I want the center of my flower to be molded with, because I thought it should have lots of texture. And I kind of like the middle of this flower ornament because it has a little shape that looks like the center of a daisy in it. So that's what I'll use to mold. And I'm mixing up this really well. You want to keep mixing it until it is one uniform color. But you do need to work quickly because this material only lets you work so long, and then it begins to set up very quickly into a rigid, or I shouldn't say rigid, but a flexible mold. Once you have it mixed like this, you can tell that it's one solid color. I'm going to press it over the center and push it on all sides so it surrounds that shape in the middle. And then so it has a flat side on the bottom, I'll push the ornament this way and press it on the surface and just let that sit until it sets up. And you'll be able to tell when you push your fingernail into it, it leaves an indentation when it's not ready, but in a few minutes it'll bounce back and that should be set up and ready to go. And I've got one that I've already made that's all cured and ready to use for a mold. To make the center of this flower, I need a little clay. So pinch off a very small amount of the clay and press it into your mold. And the nice thing about this material is you don't need a mold release. You don't need to put olive oil or anything in there like you would with polymer clay because it doesn't stick to the metal clay. And you can either let that sit and dry and it'll just fall right out, or you can go ahead and turn the mold over and flex it just like that, and you have your center of your flower. And you will notice that getting back to this mold that already, it's just been a few minutes and I'm pressing my fingernail in and that's ready to go. And there I have a mold that I can use, just like the one I showed you. So that's a very handy way to make a quick mold. Okay, now we'll get ready to make the petals here. So I've got my little piece of clay. And be sure to oil your surface with a little olive oil or badger balm if it starts to stick. And put some on your fingers. Keep your clay wrapped up to keep it hydrated and moist. Add a little water if you need to. Especially when you're making petals or florals, you want your clay to be very moist. And I'm going to roll these petals out to be 2 playing cards thick. These playing cards are going to give me a gauge to make a nice even sheet of thin clay. And I take my roller and roll it right over the top of those cards on both sides. And I like to switch the direction of the clay so I can get a nice sheet. Once you have that, I'm going to use these little cookie cutters, and these are made for cake decorators to make gum paste flowers for cake decorating. And you can find all different shapes at the cake decorator store. And they work very well for metal clay. And I'll use a little bit of olive oil so that it won't stick. I just do it on the cutting surface of the cutter. And then I'm going to go straight down through my clay and cut out the shape of the flower. You will be surprised how easy this is to do. And while your clay is still wet, it'll be easy to apply it to the center. So I'm just going to pick this up and flip it over. Now a little trick here, because it's a little bit hard to refine the petals after I've formed the ring, I'm going to do some right now. I dip my fingers in the water and I'm going to go around and sort of pinch and smooth out the edges that the cookie cutter left. And I'm also going to slightly flatten the petals. And this will give me less refining to do later. And it'll also help it to look less like a cookie cutter and more like a hand-sculpted flower. And you can tell that it's already starting to fix that up just a bit. And now I take my center, and this can be fairly dry if you'd like, and you can use a little paste, but since we're still wet right now, it should stick just fine. Put a little drop of water in the middle, put this right in the center. And on this flower design, I'm going to curl these petals up towards the center of the flower. And it helps if I turn it upside down and let the gravity do the work. And then what I'll do is I'll just let that dry upside down. Hopefully my center will be set up enough that it won't mar. That's why you should let your center dry a little bit. And I will let it sit just like this and let it dry before I add the next row of petals. And I have one that's dry right here, and you can see because I've had it upside down like that, the petals are now pointing up in that design like that. And now to attach the next layer, I'm going to roll out another sheet of 2 cards thick of clay. Again, my clay, just add a little moisture because, again, making petals, you want them to be nice and soft. roll it in the palm of your hand, keeps it from sticking to your fingertips. And I'm going to use the same cutter again and press it straight down into the clay to do my second row. And again, I will use my water to refine my edges. If you want to change the shape, maybe make this row with the petals a little pointy. You can pinch each one as you go around. It helps the flower look a little bit more interesting. Or you can leave them rounded. If you leave them rounded, it will sort of look like a daisy shape. Now with this piece being dry, I'm going to use a little bit of syringe clay, and this will help them adhere well. So I put a little dot of this on the back, and that will act as a glue, so to speak, to adhere the two pieces together. And push the two together using that syringe clay, and I'm going to stagger the petals so they sort of alternate direction. Now on this layer, I want those petals to sort of stay just where they are, kind of flat. And go ahead and press it really well with your fingers and let that piece dry, and then we'll add our next row. Now if you want, on your last row, if you want to make the flower a lot larger, you can change the cutter to maybe something like this, and it'll be a bigger flower, or you can leave it the same and use the same cutter that you've used before. And that's what we'll do, we'll just use the same one. Roll out your last set of petals. And again, if you need a little syringe clay, add it to the center. Make them really stick well together. On this last one, I can either let that piece that I made before with the two layers dry, or I can do it when it's somewhat wet if I'm just really careful with the petals, and I'm pressing all three layers really well together. And I'll take that, and I want this last set of petals to sort of curl downward so that this flower has some animation to it. And I can just use the back of my mold or something, use this one, something to let it dry on so that these petals have somewhere to sit so that they can curve downward and dry like that. And I'll just let that piece dry for a while and set that aside. To roll out the ring shank, I'm going to use 4 plain cards on each side. And I've rolled out a strip of clay here. And I'll use my roller to roll a nice, even, thick sheet for the ring shank. Sometimes you need to move your cards around a little to follow your roller if you need to. Now to make a ring with PMC3, if you use Hattie's Patties, which are a really nice system to make sure your ring fits properly, you'll want to make your ring 2 sizes bigger than your ring size. So I wear a size 5, and so I want to wrap it around a mandrel at a size 7, and that'll allow for the shrinkage in the kiln to accommodate that so that everything will fit. And after I've rolled that out, I'm going to cut with a long blade on each side here. Remove the excess. And it does help, that's stuck to my blade a little, to add a little oil if you need to, and that won't stick so bad. And cut the ring shank to the thickness that you like. Because this is a delicate little ring, I'm not making mine very wide. But if you make a larger flower, you'll probably want to make a really nice thick ring shank, wide. And cut off the end a little bit. This is a ring mandrel that's really nice because it's all the same width around, it's not graduated, and this works really well with the rings. And you wrap a piece of Hattie's No Stick paper around with the shiny side out, and that'll help your ring not to stick. And you wrap it around, wrap your clay around. And again, this is my size 7 size mandrel. And take your craft knife or your X-Acto and cut at a 45-degree angle through all the layers. And remove the excess pieces. And I'm going to take a little water here and fit these together. Use your fingers to press it together and press that seam and hold it a little bit. And I love to use this rubber shaper tool to blend the seam, and go ahead and blend that really well. And this is the nice part, is you don't have to worry about being too messy right here, because this is where my flower is going to sit. So I'm just worried about making sure that seam is well connected there and well adhered. And then you can let it sit. I'm twisting the ring up around to make sure that I get rid of any little